There's all these different budgeting tools, but some way or another, find a way that works for you and just see where your money goes and try to be able to step back and without judgment. And it doesn't reflect on who you are. It's just what you have been doing. And these are behaviors that are changeable, but see where your money is going and just see how much of that it lines up with like what you say you value and what things can you start to change. And then how much impact can they have? What are the biggest things that are going to have the most impact? So housing, cars, food, recurring expenses. What are those things where you can make a difference? And I think that's the best place to start. I was still in my last year of PT school, making very little money, maybe 10 or 15 grand for the year working part-time. And my wife had her first job making about 35 to 40 grand. This is in $2,000, so a bit more than now, but not a huge salary. And we just determined we would live off of her salary and use mine to every penny I got to kind of pay off her debts, which was student loans and a small car loan. And by the time I got my first couple of real paychecks, we were debt-free and we were pretty happy. So we just continued to always live off of her salary and we just continued to save mine. I was just following blindly my financial advisor's advice. And once I kind of realized what advice we were getting, I realized how much fees we were paying. I was just certain that I was getting ripped off. And as I started to learn and read and study, I realized like what we got was not being ripped off. We were getting very standard advice. It was what, if you didn't have enough to have an AUM advisor, you were going to be sold commission products. And that's what we had. And it made sense from his standpoint why we had everything we had, but it didn't make sense from our standpoint.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm Bill Yount with my esteemed co-host, Jackie Cummins-Koski. And today we're going to talk about things like retirement calculators and the advantages of starting late. So let's jump in, Jackie. Tell us who this guy, Chris Mamula, is.
Well, hey, Bill, how's everything going with you today? Always great to hang out with you and with our awesome guest, Chris Mamula. He used principles of traditional retirement planning combined with creative lifestyle design to retire from his career as a physical therapist at the age of 41. He got me beat. He, his wife, and his young daughter then made a cross-country move from Pennsylvania to Utah to pursue their passion for outdoor adventure. After poor experiences with the financial industry, early on in his professional life, he educated himself on investing, taxes, and retirement planning, and including recently earning his CFP credential. And CFP is Certified Financial Planner. Chris now draws on his experience to write and speak about wealth building, investing, financial planning, financial independence, and early retirement, FIRE, something we love, and lifestyle design at his blog called Can I Retire Yet? Many of our audience may be familiar with that one. He is also the primary author of the book, ChuseFi, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. It was an awesome book. It sold tons of copies. Chris also works one-on-one as an advice-only, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is, an advice-only financial planner with Abunda Wealth, and we'll talk more about it. And it's just interesting to kind of see his trajectory. So Chris, welcome to Catching Up to FI.
It's a pleasure to be here and talk with both of you again.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great seeing you at Economy and hearing your talk and meeting you finally. That's the best part of this community is meeting the people that influence your lives. And we hope today that you influence our late starter lives.
Yeah, it was fun going to that.
Yeah, it was great seeing you in person. It always is. It just sort of makes us a little bit more comfortable with you and hopefully vice versa. So Chris, why don't we start with the early days of your financial life, like leading up to this shift that you made in reaching FI and retiring early. So can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, so Bill, I know you're in the medical field, so you'll probably relate to this, but I went to school to become a physical therapist. So for me, it was not quite as long as you, but it was 8 years in school between my bachelor's and my master's and my DPT. And so you're just learning all these things about things you do to practice and ultimately to make money, but you never learn anything about what to do with your money. And so, luckily for me, I had parents who kind of helped me lay a solid foundation as far as just the simple things, avoiding debt, living below your means. But I had no idea what I was doing with investing, tax planning. So I went to my parents and I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they referred me to their advisor. And I had this horrible experience with him. And 10 years later, after just listening to everything he said, doing zero due diligence, because I just figured he was good enough for my parents, he was good enough for me. And I realized I was making a lot of mistakes. And that's when I found a bunch of the other fire bloggers. And I went kind of headfirst down the rabbit hole into the whole fire community. But yeah, I mean, I had the habits in place and I kind of was living that fire lifestyle of living well below my means. But all the technical stuff, I had no clue what I was doing. And I really didn't think it was possible to retire at 40 or even 50. I didn't know anybody that was doing it. I didn't see anybody out there. So yeah, I was just kind of living my own life, doing my own thing and marching to the beat of my own drummer, I guess.
Help us a bit with the numbers because our audience likes to know that you can do it on a low or average income. Can you tell us what you were earning, what your savings rate was, and that you can do this in a certain amount of time, whether it be early or late?
Yeah, so our the method to our madness, again, we had no system or goals or anything. So all I knew is my parents really hammered home to me the idea of being debt free and living below your means. And my wife came from a family, similar background, but they weren't as solid with money. So she paid completely for herself going through school. Whereas I got through school between my parents helping and working and scholarships completely debt free. And so as we were going to get married, it was just freaked me out. And so I wanted us to be debt free before we got married. So what we decided, I was still in my last year of PT school, making very little money, maybe 10 or 15 grand through the year working part time. And my wife had her first job making about 35 to 40 grand. This is in $2,000, so a bit more than now, but not a huge salary. And we just determined we would live off of her salary and use mine to every penny I got to kind of pay off her debts, which was student loans and a small car loan. And by the time I got my first couple of real paychecks, we were debt free and we were pretty happy. So we just continued to always live off of her salary and we just continued to save mine. So as a starting physical therapist in Pittsburgh at the time, it was very low salaries. I started also about $40,000 only. Over time, we both grew our salary. We both maxed out in like 90-ish thousand. Neither of us ever made $100,000 in a year, but we always lived off of hers and saved mine just because we kind of got into that habit. No reason one or the other, just we made pretty equal income. So we had basically a 50% savings rate. And we did that from, I guess I got out of PT school when we were at zero around 2001. And I left my job in 2017. So 16 years it took us.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
that's incredible. And with the compounding effect, you're very transparent. So you're saving roughly $80,000, $90,000 a year. You work 16 years. Can you tell us where your fire number was when you reached it? Was it a number? Was it a time? And what was it when you reached it and why did you stop?
Yeah. So a couple of things I'll say. First off, we definitely weren't saving 80, 90 the whole time because, again, we started at about 40. So we grew our income over time, but we were starting much less than that. And then we were saving really with no purpose. So we were paying way more income tax and way more investing fees than we knew. So and we were losing a lot, like just leaking a lot of money to unnecessary fees and taxes along the way. So for a good 10, 12 years till we kind of figured out what we were doing. So yeah, it was definitely less than that. And then we just kind of did it because it was, again, just kind of comfortable. So when I found the fire community, I kind of bought into the idea of like retirement and full financial independence was the goal. And retirement, you need to have 25 times your annual spending. So I think that's a great starting point because it gives you a true north to shoot for. But then as we started thinking about this, when we were retiring, it was very low interest rates. So there was a lot of like talk about is 4% too much? And we kind of got into that and kind of got a little bit scared. There was the idea like we had a young child and our expenses were going to fluctuate substantially over time. So trying to having to figure that out. So ultimately where we kind of settled was we were going to make this transition before we found the fire movement. We're into the outdoors community. So we kind of latched onto this idea of like being a dirt bag. Like it's the kind of an affectionate term used in the climbing community of people that like just will crash on people's couches and sleep in cars and whatever. And that was kind of our lifestyle. We lived very frugally because we were chasing our passions or a ski bum. So we were going to move to Utah in 2011. And then we didn't think we could have a child. We didn't think my wife could get pregnant after a whole decade of marriage. And then just as we were about to make the move, we found out she was pregnant. So that's what got me very serious about the whole personal finance thing. And so as we were approaching our number, we weren't quite there. We were probably about 20, 21 times our annual expenses. But we realized like if we didn't make the move at that time and our daughter started school and started getting into her own activities and making friends, it was going to be harder to move. So it was really more of a lifestyle decision than a hitting a number or anything. and we weren't certain that we were financially independent. But my wife had at that point found a work remote part-time job that she liked. And my original plan was just to work part-time as a PT. But then I kind of fell into the writing on the blog and with the ChuseFI books, I was making some money from my writing. So I never did go back to work as a PT, but my intention was never to fully retire. And we didn't have a set number.
So, Chris, I got a quick question. So, I heard you talk about the fact that you guys had been trying for a long time to have a kid. And then all of a sudden, she's pregnant after all this time. Was there anything in particular that you could think of that might have helped that along, or something that you did different where finally, boop, she just got pregnant?
Jack, are you asking me how to make a baby?
Would
No.
you get what I'm saying? If you're doing the same thing for years and nothing was different, and then all of a sudden,
It's because of fire. I mean, they were exiting. The stress was less. They hit their number. The kid came better around fire.
No, like I said, we had no idea. We had no idea of fire, so I can't give it any credit. No, I have no idea. Just life happens. I can't explain.
So, Chris, you just told us how to make a baby, and Jackie was kind of interested. Maybe she didn't know, but at any rate, she had an immaculate conception for her daughter. So, at any rate, I do want to know, when in this fire journey did the child come, and how dramatically did that change your approach to fire?
So that's a hard question. So let me think about this. So we were in the process of just, I guess I could tell you what our plan was before we knew we were going to have a baby. Is we were going to move west. I was going to keep my PT license. I was going to take maybe 6 months off and try to find like a part-time, very casual work role. Like we knew we had substantial savings. I would say we had at least $500,000 in a paid off house, just to kind of be transparent with numbers. And so we figured we would just buy a paid off house and we would still have a head start. But again, we had no concept even of how much you would need to retire or if that was really possible. So the plan was, my wife had a job offer with a company called Black Diamond. So she was going to work full time. And Black Diamond is a company that manufactures climbing gear and backcountry ski gear. So she would have been making a normal salary working full time with a company that would kind of provide a social system for what we wanted to do moving to Utah in the mountains. And then I figured I could make a bit of money to supplement that. Like I knew we didn't need 2 full-time incomes because again, we were saving $80,000-$90,000 a year. With a paid off house, probably even more than that. We probably had more than a 50% savings rate. But again, just we didn't really have a plan. So I can't really give you a whole lot of detail because we were just kind of winging it and making it up as we go. And then once we found the fire movement, what changed was it really made me take control of my investments. And really, I just read everything I could. It's like all the early fire bloggers, Pete, Mr. Money Mustache, and JL, and Mad Fientists. And I found Can I Retire Yet?, which is now my blog, but it was written by Daryl Kirkpatrick at the time. And all those early fire blogs, I just consumed everything I could get my hands on and really changed everything on the technical side.
Yeah. What about the child? And then when did that hit? And how did that change everything? Did it delay your fire? Did it matter? Because there's a lot of expenses associated with the child in college and all that, depending on what you want to do. How did that impact you?
It's hard to say because we didn't really track our spending before. We started living off of my wife's salary when she was making only $40,000, maybe even a little less. And we both, again, maxed out around 90-ish thousand. So we were increasing our lifestyle and doing everything we wanted. So we really just didn't pay a lot of attention. So we definitely started tracking our spending after. So I could tell you what we spent after, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to really compare because we were just kind of going by the seat of our pants. Again, we had really good habits of living way below our means. But other than that, we didn't, on the technical side, I don't know what our spending was. Our investing had no plan. We were just buying loaded mutual funds and we had a variable annuity inside of a tax advantage account. Like we were doing literally everything that I would tell somebody not to do is what we were doing. But we had the habits in place. So that made the changes easier.
So we hear that story over and over and over again about the mistakes we made, and you recovered from them and retired at 41. But you're not really retired. You're probably busier than ever. You're a CFP, you write this blog, you do so much. I want to know if when you got to your fire number, do you draw down now, or is all this extra work cover the expenses that you have in the year, this side hustle that turned into a prime hustle?
Yeah, so my wife now works 20 hours a week. She still works with that same company, but 20 hours a week. And then I work only 10 hours a week doing the financial planning with Abundo. And then as far as the blog, I only write like one article a month, one new article. And then I have somebody I brought on who helps me. So I'm not making much money and we can live mostly off of my wife's income still because, again, we have a paid off house, paid off cars. We have very low expenses. And then anything I do make, we still actually save. So yeah, we're not drawing down at this point. I would say we don't have much of a savings rate anymore, but we're basically kind of like living a paycheck to paycheck kind of lifestyle. But that's more than enough because in the background, we were probably financially independent without any income. And so that's just compounding and growing. And by the time we do start drawing down, it'll be such a low percentage that it won't really matter.
So would we call that CUtFI? Where if you let everything grow and you continue sort of working and living off of what you make and your nest egg is growing and it'll be way more than what you need when you are ready to retire. Is that what they call CUtFI?
I think like I hear people talk about that now. Like that wasn't a thing. Like that wasn't our plan. Our
Right.
plan was to get to financial independence and like
Yeah.
not have to work. Yeah. And if I would have known that our life kind of revolves around our daughter's schedule, and we thought like maybe we would homeschool or something, but she's thriving in a traditional school setting. And so we're kind of limited to like when we can travel and when we can do things. So yeah, so if I would have probably put more thought into it and realized that, I probably would have done more of a coast-fi approach where I would have cut back even sooner, knowing that we didn't need to work that hard and save that much for those extra years. But again, the fire community was quite different 10 years ago when I was, or 10, 12 years ago when I was falling into it. I was actually kind of thinking, Jackie, I mentioned before, I think we started recording, but I got your book that's coming out. And just like seeing a fire book, first off, Fire for Dummies, which is kind of cool because it's like such a pop culture thing. And like before,
Right,
fire was
right.
such a fringe, weird thing. And then just the fact that you are a Black woman, like when I started writing, I was diversity because I wasn't an engineer. And
Right.
I was a white guy who happened to be in healthcare. But like I was adding diversity to the fire movement because it was all white engineer guys. I checked like 2 of those 3 boxes, but I wasn't an engineer and I didn't really get all these things right. I had made a lot of mistakes. So I kind of thought like I was adding a unique voice at that time. But yeah, the fire community is just so much more diverse and so many different stories and different
Absolutely.
approaches and paths. And yeah, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think we started around the same time. I think I started learning about it maybe around 2014, 2015, something like that. And it took me about a 10-year window. But yeah, it wasn't all these flavors of Phi, Coast Phi, Fat Phi, and all that. None of that stuff existed, but I had to put it in the book. Well, talking about books, so you guys started early on when you put out the ChuseFI book. And I listen a lot to the ChuseFI podcast. Bill, did you listen to ChuseFI podcast?
Oh yeah, that's where I met Becky. I
Yeah.
met her on her episode, and that's how she became our first co-host.
Yeah, and we love podcasts. We're auditory learners. So a lot of us that didn't really read blogs, or even people that did read blogs, they navigated toward the Choose FI podcast. To me, that was the first sort of fire focused podcast. And the Facebook group grew quickly and it was awesome. And the same thing with the podcast. And then along came the book. We mostly knew Brad and Jonathan because they were the hosts. So I'd like to hear more about how the book came about, your role in it, and like any big takeaways, because the book has been out, I want to say 5 years.
Came out in 2019 in the fall. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're close to 5 years. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about the Choose FI book. This changed a lot of lives. It's alongside the Choose FI podcast, and you were very involved in that. You're the author. I don't know, you might have been the main author. I don't know if the other guys are writers. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned like my background of finding Pete and JL and Brandon and all these different bloggers. And again, I wasn't into the hardcore frugality by any means. Like during our path, again, and I think it maybe in some ways I talked about the mistakes and the negative aspects of not having any role models, but I think on the positive side, like we spent pretty freely again because we got the big things right with housing and cars and we lived in a relatively low cost area. I went to the Super Bowl twice. We got into high altitude mountaineering. So we've been to Africa, hiked Kilimanjaro and been on safari. We've been 20,000 foot mountains in South America. So I wasn't living this super frugal lifestyle. Again, the kind of thinking about like the diverse viewpoints versus just, even though I was another white guy writing about fire. So like what I wanted to do as I started finding these other fire bloggers, I just kind of took little bits and pieces from everyone, but I didn't go hardcore like, I'm going to ride my bike everywhere and sell off all my possessions and try to live on $20,000 a year or anything. But I took little bits and pieces from everybody, like JL's investing philosophy, Brandon's tax philosophy, like all these different people. And so as I was doing this, I never really listened to podcasts at that time. Again, that was kind of a new medium at the time. And I really fell in love with the early episodes of the Tim Ferriss podcast. And what he did was interviewed people that were really successful from all these different walks of life. And he wrote a book called Tools of Titans. And it kind of took lessons from each of his individual people. And I thought that would be cool with the fire community. And so I would maybe I thought once I freed up my time from being a physical therapist, I would start talking to people. And then as I did that, turn that into a book following that model because I loved that book and I loved his podcast. And then ChuseFI came out, and I was like, man, they're doing exactly what I wanted to do. And so I just reached out to them, and luckily I think I got them right before like they hit that hockey stick moment where they really took off. And so they were very
Yeah.
open, and I guess they had just realized that themselves, that like they were having these interviews and they were just starting to gain some steam, but they were coming from all these different places and they didn't have a way to like kind of organize it. So they loved that idea. And so that's how the partnership happened. And yeah, I was the primary voice of the book. I basically wrote the book, but they gave me access to every interview at that time, and then kind of gave me feedback as we were going. And we kind of worked on it in that way together from an editorial standpoint. But yeah, I was the writer of the book.
Hey, Bill, I got my CFP credential a few years ago, but you had been talking about possibly getting yours, and you were so interested in that CFP level knowledge. Are you still interested in that?
Yeah, but I don't want the credentials. How do I do it,
Mm.
a little bit on the lighter version?
Well, I think I got just the thing for you. I got with my friends at the Boston Institute of Finance, and guess what? They have come up with a personal growth track curriculum that is for people that just want to expand their own knowledge. They don't need course credit, but they want that CFP level education. And it's going to be for a lot less than what you would normally pay for going for the CFP.
Well, do they have different programs? My schedule's a little off. Do I have to be live for classes, or how does it work?
I know you're a busy guy at the hospital all the time, but they have two options. They have self-paced courses that you can either take individual, you can just take tax if you want, or they have the instructor-led courses. So probably you'd like the flexible one. But the good thing is that you can learn on the go. Their whole program is mobile friendly, and you could use your iPad, you can use your cell phone, but they make it super easy. So I think it might be just for you.
It sounds like it. I'll check it out.
Yeah, just check out bostonifi.com/personal-growth. We'll drop it in the show notes, but it could be something that will help you up your game. So when you proposed the book to Brad and Jonathan, you didn't know them before you reached out to them about the book? No?
No. And it's kind of funny. I think there's this perception that fire people, they don't really fire because you're making all this money and it's this big business thing. Like Brad and Jonathan, the book deal was like a Google Doc like that we wrote up together. We never had a lawyer or anything. And the same thing with my thing with Can I Retire Yet? Like I was a reader of that blog forever. I sensed that Darrow, who started it, he never had a guest post on the site ever. And I was reading it and I sensed he was kind of burning out. And I reached out and I said, I'm quitting. I said, I've been writing for a while. I really haven't had a chance to build an audience. Would you be open to a partner? And it was kind of the same thing. It was just like a handshake deal, and it turned into a partnership. And he eventually decided to step away, but we've remained great friends. And yeah, I mean, to me, that's the beauty of fire is like you can kind of do these things. There's really no risk because the worst thing that happens is it just doesn't work out. But yeah, I think that's kind of part of the reason they have worked out is because it's kind of low pressure and really doing it for the right reasons. And I think people pick up on that.
We were just talking to Tay Kim about reinvention, and you are again another example of reinvention and exiting healthcare, which is a difficult field to be in. And now it seems like you're living your dream, living your best life, following your passions, and you've even gotten your CFP. So a book, a blog, a CFP, and this all stemmed from being a physical therapist. I find it fascinating, and we would encourage our late starter audience to not let themselves get stuck in the mud. You can reinvent yourself even as a late starter. Heck, what's his name? Colonel Sanders started Kentucky Fried Chicken in his 50s, right? So I'm looking for my Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Well, and I'm picking up on a theme here, Bill. It seems like Chris is pretty comfortable with like reaching out even to a stranger to either ask or propose something and taking risk because you didn't know the ChuseFI guys. You really didn't know Darrow at Can I Retire Yet? You reached out to them. I have been shy in the past and it would scare me to death to do that. But you felt comfortable enough to do that, Chris. And were you afraid that they would just say, don't bother me, kid, or not respond or what?
Well, I mean, again, if they would have said no, I would have been right in the exact same place I would have been if I didn't ask. So again, there was really no risk. And again, I didn't know if I could ever sell. I didn't know if I could complete a book, first off, let alone sell any. Like, so I didn't know if that was going to make any money. Again, the agreement I went into Can I Retire Yet with was basically I was just kind of there to learn from him and to contribute. And then if I could grow it, then I would participate in the upside. We kind of developed a deal that it was no risk to him. And I only benefited if I could bring value. So if you present things like that, I mean, what's the reason for people to turn you down or say no? I mean, the hardest part I think is getting people to take your email, because we live in such a world of so much junk and stuff. So both of those were
Right.
email introductions. But yeah, I think if you have an introduction and you approach things from how can you add value to somebody else versus like how can I get as much as I can for myself, there's really no downside in it for them either. And it definitely increases your odds. I mean, not everybody's going to say yes, but it makes it more attractive.
Yeah, let's give a shout out to Daryl because I've read his book, Can I Retire Yet? And that is a treatise on how to do it. I mean, it's a relatively short book, it's a little bit dense, but I would encourage our audience to look at that book because it can help you reverse engineer your path to fire as a late starter. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about the Can I Retire Yet blog? Like, when did you connect with Daryl? How long has it been? And what is the blog really focusing on today?
Yeah. So it kind of goes, if I could go back to how I connected. So I knew we were going to leave, and I was with my same employer for like 14 years. And so I turned in my notice in like April of 2017, telling them I was going to quit in December. So I gave them like a 5-6 month notice. And at that point, I didn't really know what I was going to do. We knew we wanted to move west. So at that point, I was thinking I was just going to be a part-time PT, but I had an old blog called Eat the Financial Elephant, which is now defunct, but I let that
I
just
remember
die.
that.
But yeah, I had been writing for 5 or 6 years, just never monetized it, never really publicized it, just kind of grew organically. And I wanted to write more. I knew that. And so I reached out, I think, to the ChuseFI guys first. That would have probably been shortly after I quit, or maybe even before I quit, but I knew I was going to. And then I reached out to Darrow probably that summer, like a few months after. So yeah, I ended up having 2 gigs like before before I quit. So I quit my job on, I think, December 1st. It was a Friday. And then on the Monday, I guess would have been like December 4th, I started working on both of those projects, really kind of diving into them.
Oh, so they happened right around the same time.
And you've
Yep.
been retired now, what, 7 years?
Yeah, it was December of 17 or 18. I have to look. I think it was 17. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
impressive. That's
Yeah.
impressive.
And so you killed the financial elephant.
Hmm.
And you moved on to these other and the funny thing is, I know it was a small blog, but I used to read that blog and I didn't know that you wrote that blog. So you had at least one fan over here.
It's surprising. I've had a number of
um
people, like when I go to like economy, I had people come and say, "Oh, I read your old blog," and they recognize me from that. And even one of our advisors at Abundo was an old Can I Retire, or I'm sorry, an old Eat the Financial Elephant reader. And so that's how she followed me to Can I Retire Yet, and then that's how she ended up working there. So yeah, it's weird how you don't really feel like anybody's reading. It was relatively small, but yeah, it definitely
right.
made some impact.
Exactly. So with the Can I Retire Yet blog, so what does it look like today? You said you write about an article once a month, you have a little bit of help because I think it's still an awesome blog. I subscribe to the newsletter and I think once a week you send Monday mornings. Is it Monday morning?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I decided to clean up my mailbox, my email box, and now I only want the stuff that I proactively will read and open up. And Can I Retire Yet is one of those. I enjoy getting it every Monday morning. So tell us where it's at today, because I think a lot of our listeners would be very interested because we're always looking for good, high quality resources. And I like some of the topics that you've chosen. So tell us a little bit more about it and what's going on with it now.
Yeah, so we still publish every Monday. I was kind of getting to the point where I was burning out on writing and just all the stuff that goes into managing a blog. So last summer, fall, I sent out a thing to my email audience just saying like I was looking for some help on the blog and seeing what I would get, expecting maybe I would get 2 or 3 responses. And I got just bombarded with just unbelievably talented people who wanted to help out. And so after kind of talking to a bunch of them and having some people submit some things, I ended up choosing a guy named David, who's been a reader for 5 years or maybe longer. I think he was a reader of Darrow's stuff before I even came on. And so he's now come on and he's writing 1 post a month. And then I'm doing my work with Abundo Wealth. And so it's kind of it helps me to give me some content and really good content from people who are CFPs writing, and it helps them to publicize a little bit. So they write a post a month, like one of the people from the team. And then I still write 1 post. And then I do, like today, I just published, I call it the best of. So I'll just a bunch of like links to like maybe 8 or 10 articles that I found of things that I've been reading that I find interesting. So yeah, it's once a week, but for me personally, I'm only writing like once a month, one new content, and then one I aggregate, but I'm reading that stuff anyway, so that's pretty easy.
So these are things that we would encourage our audience to check out if they haven't found them already. But in one of your posts, actually, you sent to us that I think is very pertinent to our late start audience, and you were titled it 7 Advantages When You Start Saving for Retirement Late. I'd like to go through those, and if need prompting, I can certainly prompt you because some of them aren't necessarily intuitive and are different from ones that we might have gotten on the board at the economy conference in our breakout, right, Jackie?
Yeah, yeah. And the stuff that we hear a lot in our group, sometimes some of the things that are mentioned didn't show up in his list. So it's worth kind of going through that and let's see what we missed and what was the same.
Yeah, if you want to prompt me, I wrote it a bit ago, but yeah, so
Yeah,
I think.
I got him right here.
But before we dive into it, like I would just say, like, so kind of going back to the ChuseFI book and like kind of what drew me into this is I think again, there was that perception when I started writing that fire was this extreme lifestyle. You had to get it right from the beginning. Like, so you people that just knew everything magically at age 20 and then they retired at age 30. And then a lot of them, like you're living in a van down by the river, living on one of the other ones I found early was like early retirement extreme, where I think he was living on like $10,000 a year in San Francisco. And it was all these stories that seemed extreme. But what I wanted to do is just say, okay, if you apply these principles, they really apply to anybody. And for a late starter, all these things that fire people were doing. So if you can do this and achieve independence, if you start at 20 and you're financially independent by 30 or 35, if you're starting at 50, that's how you're going to catch up by 65, but you have a lot of advantages. And so I wanted to highlight that and make this more accessible because the principles, again, you've written the book and on this topic also, and these principles apply to anybody. It's just math is math. So.
Yeah, I mean, some of the ones that stuck out to me, Bill, was that saving during your prime earning years. So, Chris, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I shared a little bit about my story, but my wife was making, again, about 35, 40 grand a year starting. And I was still in PT school, so I wasn't even making maybe 10 or 12 grand. And we started living off one salary and saving the other. And then it got progressively easier for us, and we were able to elevate our lifestyle as we did that as we both grew our income. But again, I left my job when I was 41. I never hit 100,000, and neither did she. And that's because we left before we ever hit our peak earning years. So it's on one hand, it's easier because we started early and we didn't have to cut anything of real value. Like Bill asked what I changed. We cut a ton of investing fees, which that doesn't make my life any worse. I cut a lot of taxes, which that didn't make my life any worse. So it was easy for us to make changes. But if you are willing to consider the things that you have to do, like if you elevated your lifestyle, that might be harder because maybe you have to downsize your housing or change your approach to buying cars or those big things that we were just automatically getting right. But if you can do that, you're doing it then with a higher income on average. Most people, their income tends to go up through their career. So you're in your peak earning years. We did it all before we ever really hit what should have been our peak earning years. And so we left a lot of money on the table. So that's definitely an advantage somebody that starts late would have.
Yeah, and I agree with that because I was like 49, but when you look at your Social Security statement, you can see that trajectory. And it's just almost like a natural progression. And that's what I tell people also that get a little discouraged. If they're making, let's say, $40,000 a year, they're like, I cannot make any traction. And I'm like, do you think you'll always be making $40,000 a year? And this person is probably like 31. And I'm like, at 35, do you think you'll be making more? So that's a really important point.
Yep. And you mentioned downsizing as part of it. You have a couple of levers to pull there. You increased your savings rate. You're saving during your prime earning years. We moved it from like 10% to 40% almost overnight when we realized what we were doing. But then we also downsized the big rocks we talk about: housing, transportation, and food. When you downsize the house, and we paid it off, all of a sudden you have all this money to throw at your fire. So I completely agree with, but downsizing your lifestyles we've talked about before, it's in some ways hard because you have gotten used to things and you have hedonic adaptation, and unwinding that we found both illuminating, enlightening, and lightening the weight on our shoulders, but really hard to do. Even just emptying the house and getting rid of half the stuff, that wasn't easy either.
Yeah, and I definitely, that's why I acknowledge like we started on the right foot. And so that made it easier for us. But that being said, the one thing, like as you're getting older, if you're getting to that point where you're empty nesting and like your kids are moving out, that's kind of just a natural transition point where you might want to think about it. So if you bought a house because you felt like you needed it because you had 2 or 3 kids, but now those kids are moving on. In addition to like just not having those mouths to feed and those people to clothe anymore, you don't need that much space. So that could be a natural time to make it a bit easier. It's just a natural kind of cue to kind of help you to make that transition, I think.
And that's where we kind of woke up, was as we were transitioning to the empty nest. And as you've mentioned, I think one of the advantages of an empty nest is hopefully the kids are off the payroll. College is paid for, or they've taken on the cost of college and it's their nut. But then again, that all of a sudden, those expenses of raising kids come back to you, and you can add that to your savings pile as long as you're intentional about doing this and don't just let this money slip through your fingers into lifestyle again. So that one is also important. But things that you talk about here, people don't necessarily remember. And there's some numbers to this, actually. Then you talk about catch up contributions. Can you go through a couple of those so that people are aware this is what you can do when you have more money to throw at the fire?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big things that we write a lot about is just you like one of the just simple things you can do. And again, something that I personally didn't do early because our advisor didn't tell us to, but just using all the tax advantaged retirement accounts that you have. So if you have a 401k at your work, that's a great account to use as much as you can to defer some taxes, or if you have a Roth version to at least shield that money and let it grow and then have access to it later. But there are limits to those accounts. So once you hit age 50, now you have an extra, I think it's $7,500 this year. For your HSA, again, a great kind of stealth retirement account. It doesn't have quite as high of a contribution limit, but as you're over, I think that one it's 50, then you can put another $1,000 in. Same thing with your IRA or your Roth IRA if you're using one of those. Not as big of a contribution. It's like $7,000 this year in 24. But then if you are over 50 again, you have that catch-up contribution. So that's 1,000. So if you're using all three of those accounts just for one person, the 7,500 on your work account plus the 1,000 on your HSA plus the 1,000 on your IRA, you're looking at about an extra $10,000 that you can shield from taxation that can work to your advantage. So that's a substantial boost to you that a younger person wouldn't have. And again, combining that with being in your peak earning years, hopefully you'll be able to save that much and actually use all of that space. So that's a pretty huge advantage that, again, a younger fire pursuer would not have at their access.
Yeah, agreed with that. I got to take advantage of it. I was 49 when I retired, but I was turning 50 like December 15th of that year. So I was able to get the catch up for the 401k and my IRA for at least 1 year. So those can't be overlooked. Now, one thing that, we both have our CFP, so we know that Social Security, we hit that hard when we're studying for the exam. And you talk about how Social Security fills the gap, and that since we're a little bit closer to that, that makes a difference. So talk a little bit about the Social Security aspect of it for later starters.
Yeah, so I think now that we're talking about this, some of these points are coming back. So one of the other just points that I made in that article was like, if say you're like myself and you're retiring at 40, you have like basically if you don't want to take Social Security till 70, you have 30 years to get to a traditional retirement. And then from 70 to, if you're planning to 90 or 100 even maybe. So you maybe have 2 whole retirements to plan. So you just have that much more longevity risk. And that doesn't mean you need twice as much because the math of retirement just doesn't work quite that way. But you do need to have some more money because of that longevity. And then that the kind of the quote, first retirement before your traditional retirement, you have to kind of fill that whole spending need through your either part-time work or your portfolio or rental income or however you're meeting your income needs. Whereas a traditional retiree, if you're retiring at 65 or 70 and you have access to Social Security, that's going to at least give you a floor under your expenses that you're always going to have that income and it's always going to adjust up. And it's assuming that our country doesn't completely implode. It's always guaranteed. And if it does, then you have bigger problems than your Social Security payment. So you have that, and it's a huge advantage again. So you don't need to save nearly as much for a traditional retirement as you would for an early retirement, particularly if it's a long early retirement, like somebody that's retiring in their 30s or 40s, and you have that 20 to 30 year gap to fill in before you can claim Social Security.
Yeah, when you
Yeah.
refer to a decreased longevity risk, I think that's what you're referring to with regards to 2 retirements. Working longer means you're going to die sooner in a way, and you don't have to worry about the long runway, right?
Yeah, I mean, in most aspects of life, thinking about having less life is not an advantage. But in retirement planning, when you're looking at the math of how many years you have to support, that is actually an advantage, even if it's not one we definitely want to jump up and down and celebrate and get excited about.
Yeah, it's a little morbid, but it's reality. It allows you to have to save less and have less of a multiple. Another one that you mentioned, which I like too, because we have yet to talk about this, but you have more certainty with healthcare. And healthcare is one of the items that really befuddles earlier retirees, and in order to pay for it, given what is perceived to be an exorbitant cost. What advantage do late starters have with regards to healthcare?
Well, I mean, you can't make the mistake of thinking Medicare is completely free and you're not going to have any expenses, but there is definitely an advantage of once you get to Medicare, you have more certainty with so I mentioned my wife and I both work part-time, so we have some income coming. And so we still are able to take advantage of HSA, like the premium tax credits, but not as much as we could if we didn't have any income. So it's always kind of this balancing act of how you generate your income and how you manage that to get the premium credits. But then the other thing is, it's just the uncertainty. Like the law changes all the time. So right now, the law is in effect only through, I believe, the end of next year. So again, people listen to this all the time. So we're in 2024. So through 2025, but it was a provision of one of the COVID bills that it eliminated what was called the subsidy cliff. So before that bill, if you went over a certain income limit, you lost all of your tax credit. So that was eliminated for a period of time, but we don't know what's going to happen after 20. If it expires and it goes back, that cliff comes back. Who knows? That what tends to have happened since this law went into effect, the Obamacare or Affordable Care Act, is it's gotten more generous over time, but it's always with a lot of wrangling and a lot of politicizing, and we just don't know. And when you have to potentially fill that gap for 25 years, 30 years till Medicare, and you don't even know what the rules are 3 years in advance, it just adds a ton of uncertainty and risk to your plan. So Medicare is a huge advantage, even though, again, it's not completely free.
Chris, was that the American Rescue Plan? Was that the RP or AARPP or something? I think that was the one, because I remember when they changed that, the subsidy cliff where it was removed. But you're right. I mean, you have the uncertainties of law changes and you can never predict those.
Yeah, and I've written about it on my site. So the first year they did it, it was like a retroactive law. They didn't even pass it till I think like February or March for the year that it was already in effect. And then I believe it was the Inflation Reduction Act or one of the, I don't know. All these things have crazy names, but I think that was the one that extended
Yeah,
it 2 years.
it floats around.
I do have like detailed, I've written about it, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah. It's just too confusing. There's a lot of laws that have happened, and we studied hard during the CFP exam. We knew it then, but good Lord, it's out of our head as soon as we passed the exam. So,
All right.
Good point.
Hey, Catching Up to Fi audience. This is Bill Young telling you that we have some great sponsors here on our show these days. Jeremy Schneider, who's been on the show and is the founder of Personal Finance Club, has created a couple of great courses that he is giving to our audience at a $30 discount. Click on the link in the show notes to get this deal, and you can have the course, How to Money Like a Millionaire, which normally is $99, but you can get it for $69 using the code CUTOFI if you click on the link in our show notes. The other course that he does is called Build Wealth by Investing in Index Funds. And again, this course is only $99 normally, and it's such a great value already, but you can get $30 off and pay $69 for this course as well. Now, why not take them both? Buy his Ultimate Personal Finance Bundle, which again is normally $149, but you get $30 off the bundle if you use the code CUTOFI. Go to the show notes and find the link for these courses and get started on your personal finance journey. Now, Jackie's a CFP, you're a CFP. We got to let you two talk about the CFP thing in the FIRE community.
Yeah, yes, we are CFP professionals. In the words of the new commercial that they have out, our CFP board, they work hard, right? And getting the CFP name out there, I would guess that most people, especially financial savvy people, the part of the FI movement, they are familiar with CFP. So we got to give kudos to the CFP board. So Chris, we have heard you say, and I'm quoting you, yeah, I pulled the quote. You hate the financial advice industry. So, what made you go down the CFP route and join the profession? And I'll see how much of that I agree with, because I do believe we have very similar thinking around this. So, tell us a little bit about why someone that hates the financial advice industry became a financial advisor.
Yeah, so I don't remember what the original source that sent me down the kind of rabbit hole, but again, like I was just following blindly my financial advisor's advice. And once I kind of realized what advice we were getting, I realized how much fees we were paying. I was just certain that I was getting ripped off. And as I started to learn and read and study, I realized like what we got was not being ripped off. We were getting very standard advice. It was what if you didn't have enough to have an AUM advisor, you were going to be sold commission products. And that's what we had. And it made sense from his standpoint why we had everything we had, but it didn't make sense from our standpoint. So I started writing I was just so angry. And it gave me a positive outlet to kind of just get that out and to educate myself more deeply and kind of pay it forward and kind of turn it into something positive. So that's why I started writing. And I started just being just such a critic of the financial industry. And the more I learned, frankly, the more of a critic I became and the more I did not like that industry. But then I had this really small audience and I was kind of preaching to the choir. And as I went over to Can I Retire Yet? And as I started going to like CUtFI, and I'd meet different people that probably are in your audience that are kind of catching up and that aren't nerding out on this stuff all the time. And people would have all these questions. And I felt like my hands were kind of tied. And I realized like, even people that are starting to read these blogs and starting to educate themselves, a lot of them just need help. And like, I think the investing part is pretty easy. Like indexing has kind of solved that problem. That is manageable, but there's so many other aspects to your personal finances that are not real intuitive and obvious. And I just kind of felt my hands were tied. So I kind of went down this path. A lot of it was out of boredom during COVID of like, I need a big project and I'm going to get the CFP. And I didn't know really what I was going to do with it. But my ultimate idea was if I could get the experience hours, I would just answer blog readers' questions and do it like on an hourly, like advice only basis. And then as I completed the process and I was thinking about that, and I thought like, if I'm advising people, I don't take this lightly. I think this is a very serious thing. And I don't want to be like everybody else in this industry that I'm so critical of. And so I like wanted to get some experience working under somebody. And I reached out to Cody Garrett, who I know at least Jackie, you're familiar with. And he introduced me to Abundo, and they were trying to build this advice only model. And they were one of the only places that was actually doing it at scale. A lot of people get successful with advice only, but then they get so successful and they have so much demand that their price goes up. And I still think it's less conflicted. So you're going to probably get better advice, but it's still very expensive. And I was attracted to what Abundo was doing. And I asked if I could work just part-time, and they were willing to have me do that. So again, kind of just asking for what you want. And there's really no downside if they said no. And so I started doing it there. So that's kind of how it all evolved. And I wasn't really sure about the company, honestly, when I started working there, because it almost sounded too good to be true. But after working there for now about 18 months, I just love the company. I love what we're doing. We do only offer one model, so it's not perfect for everybody. Like it's an ongoing relationship, but it's very low cost compared to the industry, and it's advice only. So we're not selling anything. We're not managing investments. And so that's kind of my full circle evolution. But I would say I'm still a pretty harsh critic of 98% of the industry, because advice only in itself is very limited. And then low cost advice only is very, very limited. So.
Well, I find it fascinating. You mentioned it as low cost. What would you say is the traditional or median cost of getting advice-only financial planning versus what Abundo does? And not that we're necessarily promoting Abundo, but we'd like to hear just so we can understand sort of the spectrum.
Yeah. So when I say low cost, I'm first comparing it to like traditional. So if you don't have much assets, you're traditionally would have been limited before advice only was offered. You would be limited to basically commissions-based salesmen. And then so AUM, assets under management, is better. It's less conflicted, but typically they don't want to work with you unless you have at least $500,000. And at that level, you're probably paying at least 1%. So you're looking at least $5,000 a year. So where advice only steps in is you don't have to have assets and you're not being sold things. So you're going to tend to get less conflicted advice, but the prices are all over the map. And again, I think a lot of people go in and they're low price by necessity. I think traditionally people thought this was a very hard model because you actually have to have people take out their credit card or their checkbook and pay you versus having these hidden fees in the commissions or in these assets that you're managing that kind of just get sucked out of your account. So you have to see the fees. But I think what people are finding is there is a demand for it. And unfortunately, there's still not many people doing it. So as far as what you would pay, it's going to vary a lot from person to person. But again, the people that are able to get the word out and have a little bit of publicity, they fill up very quickly. And so they end up raising their prices. So you're going to probably end up, whether you're paying $5,000 for an AUM or $5,000 directly, you're still paying $5,000. So our fees are it's $499 for the first month, and I believe we're $180 a month ongoing. So you're looking at about $2,500 a month, so like half of that $5,000, and then after the first year, it would get cheaper because that $500 is only the first month as an initiation fee. So again, the people that are do-it-yourselfers are going to still say, "Wow, that's a lot of money," but for people that understand what traditional models pay, it's low cost. So it's all perspective.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the assets under management AUM model, I mean, that could go as high as you can think of, depending on if you've got $1 million, your 1% is what, $10,000, and just multiply that. So just doing that quick math, it makes sense. And advice only is relatively new because we know that the financial planning industry was built on the backbone of investment. And like you said, the investing piece, that could be the easiest piece of financial planning. If you stick with an index fund, you're good. You get your allocations right. But now what about the taxes? What about the retirement piece of it, the drawdown strategies, all those things that five people look for? And Cody Garrett was on the show. He's founder and owner of Measure Twice Money. He has a do-it-yourself financial plan that we absolutely love. So there are people in the space that is doing the work and making a difference. And then you've got, I'd love to hear what you think about Jeremy from Personal Finance Club. He could never answer that question when people would say, how do I find a good financial planner? And I get his frustration. I know you do too. And finally, he did something about it, and he started Nectarine, and it's at hellonectarine.com, I think. And basically, it's a $150 flat fee for a 1 hour session. Now, that's obviously not going to be an ongoing relationship, or I guess it's supposed it could be, but it's just $150 no matter what. I think it could be ideal for some kind of project based. Let's say, for instance, if you want to roll over your 401k and you want somebody to hold your hand, that's a CFP. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that and the advice only space, because right now it is really small. Most advisors are these assets under management, but you're making a difference. Hello Nectarine is making a difference, and all this advice only. So can you like make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of what that is? Because I think we have an industry, and we have to say we now, right? Because we're part of the industry, how confusing that is. And so maybe we can give a little bit of more clarity around what exactly is advice only versus an assets under management model.
Yeah, so advice only means it. Again, I think it's clear, but there's just so many terms, it gets so confusing. So advice only means that you're paying only
It
for
is,
advice.
right.
So like fee only means you're only paying a fee, but like you can be AUM and that's technically fee only because you're only paying a fee and they're not selling you anything. But it's very confusing because there's fee based, which is they might charge a fee based on some things, but then they can also sell you things and make commissions. And all these terms are so confusing. So I like to think, because again, this is what I'm promoting, I like to think advice only is more clear and more straightforward. But again, it kind of sounds like fee only, and all these terms are confusing. And it's one of the things I hate about the industry is like they're not doing this stuff to make it easy and transparent for people, for consumers, I should say, to find good advice and to understand the conflicts that come with each. So, but advice only just means you're paying directly. Again, think of it this way. If you have to take out your checkbook or your credit card to pay, that's advice only. If you don't quite see where your fees are coming from, then that's not advice only. That's fee only or fee based or somewhere they're getting paid. Nobody's doing this for free. And if you don't really understand how they're getting paid and how much, I would encourage you to add it up, and it's probably more than you think.
Right. Put a dollar amount to it. 1% doesn't sound like much, but $10,000, oh shit, that's a lot.
Yeah, we put their kids to college, among other things. There's a topic we want to touch on before we close today, because you wrote a great article on this, and we want to get some retirement calculators across to our audience because they're in need of them, but there's so many and so different. You talk about low fidelity, medium fidelity, and high fidelity retirement calculators. Can you give us a couple of examples of each and then distinguish what that means and as terms? And this is not Fidelity, the company. This is fidelity according to sound and quality and degree of difficulty, actually. So take us through a few of those.
Yeah, what you said was perfect. And just a hat tip. So one of the people that designed one of the calculators that we affiliate with on Can I Retire Yet, his name is Chris Matthews with Pralana, Pralana. This was his concept that when Dara was also building a calculator, he started consulting and working with him, and he loved this concept. So he started writing about it, and I kind of picked up and ran with it whenever I did my presentation at Economy. So that's where that came from. It's not my term, but yeah, it has nothing to do with like Fidelity, the firm. Fidelity is just talking about the level of sophistication and accuracy that you can expect to get. And also the flip side of that is it comes with a lot more effort. So a low fidelity calculator maybe only has 3 or 4 things you put in, like what is your balance, how long is your retirement, and I don't know, maybe what rate, maybe it'll ask you for your rate of return. It'll ask you maybe 3 things, and it'll say like, what is your percent chance of success, and what is your ending balance, median balance, or something like that. It'll have very few simple inputs, very few simple outputs, and that's it. And then on the other end of the extreme is high fidelity, which is essentially like a new retirement, a Prolana, a projection lab. I'm sure there's some other ones that are skipping my mind right now that are available to like just consumers. And I would say like having had the opportunity to work with those and write about those, and now having worked with, I specifically work with a program called Right Capital, but there's different professional financial planning software. I would say that the software, these high fidelity programs, are really on par with what a professional planning software looks like. But the downside of them is there's a lot of complexity. You really have to have a handle on your numbers. You have to have a handle on what assumptions are they using. And if you're making errors and especially if you're an early retiree and those errors get compounded out over 40, 50, 60 years, I mean, they're going to be massive as far as like what the outcome is compared to reality. So you really have to have a lot more user competence and confidence to use a high fidelity calculator. And then in the middle, there's just kind of what it sounds like. More variables that you can enter, but typically the big thing that medium fidelity, they won't do like tax calculations and tax projections because it's kind of just a whole nother level of coding and calculations there. So that would be medium fidelity. So you have to kind of match up the right tool for the job that you want it to do and the amount of effort and time you're willing to put into learning it.
Can you give us a couple of examples of just, and we'll link this article in the show notes so people don't have to remember low fidelity and medium fidelity. You mentioned a few high fidelity, but when people are looking for calculators, which ones might you say touch base here? Because these are typical low fidelity or typical medium fidelity.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. I took the presentation I did at Economy and I made it into a couple of blog posts. So the ones that I included in my blog, I tried to just get a representation of different ways that they calculate returns and some different inputs. So the low fidelity, I know I used Vanguard. I think it's called the Retirement Nest Egg Calculator. And I think there was one, I think it was from Dinkytown, like Dinky Town.
That's one of my favorite. I love dinkytown.net.
Okay. Yep. So I got that. So those are the ones I used. And again, if you have the links, people can go to those and link directly to the calculators and try them out. But again, those are like 3 or 4 variable inputs and maybe 2 to 3 thing outputs. The medium, I think I used CFire Sim and I used Financial Mentor. I think it calls it the Ultimate Retirement Calculator. And again, they have a little bit different features as far as how they calculate. CFire Sim is like using historic returns, which is a bit different than a lot of them use. Monte Carlo, and Mentor's Ultimate Retirement Calculator actually uses like linear returns. So there's just different ways of using the calculations. You can enter a number of different variables that you couldn't on a low fidelity. You're not going to get like tax projections, and that's a pretty big factor depending on your lifestyle and how you have your money invested, what accounts you're using. That could be a very big factor. So those are the medium fidelity ones that I included. And again, we have, if you just Google "Can I Retire Yet?" I think it's called the Best Retirement Calculators, and there's a list of, Darrow reviewed, I think, 40 different calculators. He was a software engineer, and that was kind of his thing. So he could go way down that rabbit hole more than I could. So I just picked a couple that I thought were representative and kind of give you different examples for people to look at.
Okay, well, awesome. So you dropped a lot of really good gems around late starters and things that advantages that we have. Any other, I guess, thoughts or tips for our audience? We have a fast growing Facebook group, and a lot of times it's the psychological side that comes up and things like that. So I'm just wondering, with your clients and the work that you've been doing on the blog, the book, and all of that, any other little takeaways or tips that might be helpful to our late starter audience?
I think for anybody, and that's kind of where we started the ChuseFI book, is the whole initial session was about changing your mindset. But I think particularly for a late starter, somebody that is behind in the game, I think there's this idea that this is so hard and that you can't do it and that saving equates with sacrifice. And so I really think just having a mindset shift is where you have to start. And as far as like a practical, like what's one thing people can do, I think the first thing is just step back and like just start writing down month to month. And it could be as simple as like pen and paper or an Excel spreadsheet, or if you want to use like, Mint went out of business, but I think there's like Monarch Money and there's all these different budgeting tools. But some way or another, find a way that works for you and just see where your money goes and try to be able to step back and without judgment. And it doesn't reflect on who you are. It's just what you have been doing. And these are behaviors that are changeable, but see where your money is going and just see how much of that it lines up with like what you say you value and what things can you start to change. And then how much impact can they have? What are the biggest things that are going to have the most impact? So housing, cars, food, recurring expenses. What are those things where you can make a difference? And I think that's the best place to start.
Yeah,
Mm.
speaking of cars, and I've got to say, my car just had a major issue yesterday, and I barely limped into the repair shop. And I'm like, oh no, it has 170,000 miles on it. So kudos to me for driving the third car I've ever had that's paid off. It's not worth much, but it's worth a lot to me to get to work. And I've been saving for a new car, and I was going to be ready, a new used car to me. I was going to be ready a year from now. But now I'm like, I'm done with this. I can't deal with a car that's in the shop more than I want it to be. And I'm putting too much money for the new used car into this car that has a very finite. I was hoping to make it over 200,000 miles, quite honestly. I was like, yeah, that's a milestone. I want to be able to put that picture up on the Facebook group. But I'm looking at, okay, I'm going to have to, at this point in time, pull from one of my sinking funds. I do have one for the new used car, but it's not quite where I want it to be. So I've got to find it elsewhere in sinking funds and shift it just like in YNAB so that I can meet this new expense, which is not insignificant. And I'm committed to paying cash for cars because before we were leasing and on loans and new cars, and I'm so done with it. I am so into the utility mode with cars. Although everybody's buying Teslas in the fire movement. We talked about this with Mr. Money
Ah.
Mustache, and he's like, oh, a Tesla's only this much, and it's the same as a new car. I'm like, well, I'd rather spend $25,000 instead of $42,000. It makes a lot of difference to me. So yeah, cars is a bit of a bone to pick with me right now, and I'll have to let you know how this works out on the next episode.
Bill, I heard that electric cars are at very good prices right now. They are at depressed prices. So it may be a good time. Just saying.
I'm adverse to the long trips with them and having to find places to recharge and stuff. So hybrid is where my mindset's at, and we'll see where it lands. But stay tuned. I'll let you know.
Yeah, keep us posted for sure.
And Diana in the background saying she agrees and vroom vroom.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Diana, she's got one that she brags about all the time. Is she at 300,000 miles on her car?
Yeah,
Uh,
she has a Honda that's been around a very long
oh,
time.
I cannot imagine that. That is crazy. But she keeps us posted on that too. So yeah, cars is a big thing. Well, Chris, awesome having you on the show today. Like, I know our listeners got so much value from this. I can appreciate the fact that you are so transparent. We know typically in the financial planning space, most probably another bone to pick. They're not showing you their wallet. They're not telling you their numbers or anything. We both know that. But I have this kindred spirit. We both got our CFP around the same time. We're both not a part of the traditional industry. We'll definitely consider ourselves more a part of the FI/fire community. So this has been amazing. Bill, what do you think?
Oh, I think so too. I mean, every time we talk to somebody with so much knowledge in the community that can share it to our community, I feel so grateful. I really do. So, Chris, thanks for taking the time today. People want to reach out to you and ask them their own individual questions. How can they do that?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me on the internet is caniretireyet.com. That's my blog, and that's kind of where I link out to everything else. Always love when people check out the book, ChuseFI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. And again, if you do find that maybe you need some more help than just educating yourself and doing it yourself, again, I love the work that we're doing at Abundo. I'm very proud of that and always excited to help to get the word out on that. So it's abundowealth.com.
Yeah, we'd love to partner with Abundo. Maybe we can talk
Yeah.
to your principals about supporting the movement here at Catching Up to Fi. All right, Chris, it's been great. We'll bring you back on to talk about other topics in the future, should you have the time. Thank you again for being with us on Catching Up to Fi. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me. I'd be happy to come back. I always like talking to you guys.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. So, our social media is Diana Falk, our editor, Fritz Bassard, and show notes are done by Sarah von Sternberg. We love them and they keep us going.
Yeah, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you want to support the show and what we're doing, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to virtually say thank you if you get value from our content. The link is in the show notes, or you can head over to our website at catchinguptofi.com and click on the Support the Podcast tab at the top right. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
While we are financial educators, and I'm a financial professional that loves to teach, our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to FI.